Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani, and it is the top of the month. So we are getting into another case of MMIW women. All right, let's begin, shall we? Caitlin Potts of the First Nations was born and raised in Alberta, Canada. She was in foster care until she was around 11 years old, but her mother, Priscilla Potts, retained visitation rights and often went to see her, stating, quote, "When she was a child, on our visits, we do everything as a family. Go to the lake, have dinners. She was always happy." End quote. Caitlin moved to Edmonton with her younger sister, Cody Potts, a move she made to follow her boyfriend, who had moved to Enderby, British Columbia, months prior to the two of them. According to the family, Caitlin had a rocky relationship with her boyfriend and were on again and off again for months. Cody reported that Caitlin was abused by her boyfriend, seeing her come home with bruises. Quote, "One time, she called me crying and she was hiding in the bathroom, saying he was outside and he was going to kick the door in," end quote, reported Cody. Furthermore, Cody reported that Caitlin's boyfriend was arrested that night and she stayed at the Salmon Arm Women's Shelter following the arrest. Quote, "She was fine there, going to school and had a job at Tim Hortons until she went back to him a couple months later," end quote. On February 21st, 2016, the then 27-year-old was last seen on CCTV at Orchard Park Mall in Kelowna. Family heard from her the following day via a Facebook message to her sister, of course, Cody, and she reported that Caitlin was upset about the money her boyfriend owed her. The morning Caitlin went missing, she also left Cody a message saying she had found a ride to Calgary via a rideshare. After that, there was nothing, and family filed a missing persons report on March 1st, 2016. An official missing alert finally went up to the RCMP website 20 days later, on March 21st. It read, quote, "The RCMP Major Crimes Unit is now assisting Vernon North Okanagan RCMP with the investigation of Potts," end quote. Several other women went missing that year from the area, causing the RCMP to admit she was likely the victim of foul play. In June of 2016, Priscilla contacted groups in British Columbia in order to get help conducting searches of their own. Like many other people, she had no faith in the RCMP's investigation. Quote, "My daughter is incredibly smart. She was always on the honor roll in high school," end quote, Priscilla said, from her home in Alberta. At the time she went missing, Caitlin was approximately 5 feet 3 inches tall, 150 pounds with brown eyes, and had long black hair with blonde streaks. The man purported to be her boyfriend was Jason Natiuk. Jason reported that he was just a friend with Caitlin, not her boyfriend. The RCMP actually ended up completing a Mr. Big operation in order to garner a confession from him. I've done a previous episode with a Mr. Big operation, and in similar ways, they brought him into the fold pretending that he was going to be part of this syndicate and run little crimes and then bigger crimes. And then in order to get in, he needed to confess something for them to trust him. But it didn't work. Jason reported that Caitlin was working as an escort and that the two of them would go to the club and drink. Jason had recently broken it off with the mother of his children. Quote, "I was working all the time. And then there's this person, Caitlin, who's fun and will hang out with me and stuff," end quote, reported Jason. Further stating, quote, "The thing about Caitlin is she'd give you the shirt off her back. She's tough as nails. That's what I liked about her," end quote. Jason was charged with assaulting Caitlin in August of 2014 at the Edmond Hotel, which I mentioned earlier, for which he received a no-contact order and 14 months. After the assault, he went back to Okanagan, where he got his life back together, according to him. But then he received a call from Caitlin stating she needed help, and so he returned to Edmonton. But when he got there, the two ended up arguing, and so she called the police. As he had broke his no-contact order, he went to jail. Still, on Valentine's Day, 2016, Caitlin made a post in which Jason was in it, and he later admitted the two drank wine and hung out together. After Caitlin went missing, Jason reported that he was fully cooperative with the investigation and allowed police to search his vehicle and apartment. Still, he states, especially after the Mr. Big operation, which he says that he knew it was an operation, he was essentially ostracized by his friends and family, to the point where even his children didn't speak to him. As such, Jason was never charged because, again, the Mr. Big operation failed miserably with anything to do regarding Caitlin's disappearance. And at this time, Caitlin's case has never been resolved. Caralyn Aubrey King, a Métis woman born on December 28, 1974 to Kathy King and her father, who was Cree and Métis. She loved spending time on her grandfather's farm as she grew up. When her mother was at work, she would stay with extended relatives, growing up close-knit on her mother's side of the family. Kathy reported that Caralyn loved equestrian competitions, stating, quote, "She was doing a jumping competition and the horse started to go too fast. I was sitting up in the stands and kind of holding my heart in my hands, and I could hear her coach saying, 'Hang on,'" end quote. Caralyn grew up without her father in her life, but as she grew, became curious about her father's heritage, slowly learning about it and building relationships on her father's side of the family. In school, she struggled due to a learning disability and unfortunately ended up getting into drugs. By 18, she moved away from home, getting more into cocaine use, and unfortunately, to pay for her habit, much like many other women, took to the sex trade work. Drug use resulted in poor mental health, and she spent some time in mental institutions related to psychosis. She was hospitalized and arrested on multiple occasions. Her living situation was unstable, moving from couch surfing, homelessness, and women's shelters. Still, throughout this, she stayed in contact with her mother, who struggled to help her daughter. Kathy spoke to her daughter, who was 22 at the time, living at a women's shelter, on August 2nd, 1997, agreeing to meet the following day. This was typical for the pair. They often met up almost weekly so that Kathy could buy her food and clothes for the week. On the 3rd, Caralyn was a no-show, but again, this was sort of typical of her, and so her mother didn't worry at first. But days later, on August 5th, Caralyn missed a court date, and on the 6th, a friend of hers called Kathy to see if she had seen Caralyn. It was then Kathy began tracking down those who knew her daughter to see if they had any information on her daughter's whereabouts. After nothing, Kathy called the Edmonton police on August 9th in order to report Caralyn missing. But, of course, she was brushed off, told to call the local hospitals and jails. She did as they told her to do, and still found nothing, calling the police back on August 11th, but even at that time, they refused to take her report. Kathy didn't leave it. She went out and searched on her own. She handed out posters, and she called the police again on August 23rd. At that time, an officer told her they weren't concerned unless she had evidence of foul play. But Caralyn was missing. There wasn't anything, and so police did what they do there. Nothing. According to Kathy, after 23 days, police finally took her report and gave her a file number. She asked what happens now and essentially was told, quote, "Now we wait for a body," end quote. Like, how disrespectful is that to a family member? Unfortunately, Caralyn had been killed. She was found on September 1st by farmers harvesting their canola field when they stumbled across her decomposed remains. They were in a field in Sherwood Park, approximately 25 kilometers from Edmonton, Alberta. But the investigation was still next to nothing, and the case quickly went cold. In 1999, Kathy wrote a letter to Edmonton's chief of police to voice her concerns of the lack of investigations. She reported, quote, "I am a fairly assertive, articulate person who will work the system," end quote. In 2003, her case was given to CARE, the task force in Alberta that specifically looks into disappearances and murders of vulnerable women. Even so, there have been no updates since 2003. Lynn Prudhomme was 46 when she was found in her apartment with shopping bags over her head and knotted around her neck in 2001. Sharon Pelletier Carol's sister stated, quote, "Police say she did it to herself, but she was claustrophobic, so I can't see it. If she wanted to kill herself, she had lots of pills." End quote. That claustrophobia was so severe, she couldn't even go to the bingo hall without feeling as if she was suffocating, according to family. She does, however, acknowledge that Carol had mental health issues, further reporting that Carol was paranoid all the time. She had suffered emotional and physical abuse as a child and was protective of her siblings growing up. And even with all that, she managed to be a happy person. Sharon stated of Carol, quote, "She was happy-go-lucky. She was always giggling, even though she could be depressed at times." End quote. But as Carol got older, she struggled with alcohol abuse. And 2 days before Carol's death, she had been beaten by a few women, her sister said. According to Regina Police Service, quote, "The case of Caralyn Prudhomme is closed," end quote, and further added, quote, "It is important to note that even a case that is concluded can be reopened with new information," end quote, as if they're trying to justify what they were saying before. But family, as in many cases, is unhappy with the lack of an actual investigation, and Sharon stated, quote, "They didn't seem to be there very long, and they made assumptions that she killed herself. There were too many assumptions going on," end quote. Further reporting that in 15 years, police never bothered to contact her on her sister's case. As the police treated it as a suicide, like I said, they basically closed it before they even opened the book. Carol Ruby Davis was born on December 23rd, 1958, in Haida, Gwaii. She was a member of the Haida Nation and was the fourth child of 8. When she was young, her parents divorced. Eventually, her mother remarried, and when she did, the family moved to Vancouver. But that's when Carol began getting into trouble. Her mom's husband was white and abusive and would make fun of the children for their dark skin. Lori stated, quote, "Carol felt so bad about the color of her skin, she would bathe in bleach so her skin could get fairer. We wouldn't be made fun of by him," end quote. And while Lori was raised by her grandparents, Carol ended up in foster care. In turn, she got into drugs and spiraled downward. Everyone in the family knew Carol had been doing drugs since she was 15. Quote, "Heroin, coke, anything, if she was desperate," end quote. And that she had worked the streets for many years. She had her first child by 16, but Carol herself was still under the care of the British Columbia's Ministry of Child Welfare at the time. So Lori, again the sister of Carol, raised her son. Quote, "She wanted to be such a loving mom. She tried really hard to be that. And I think that's the memories her son has of her too. When she did have money, she would come by and take him places. She would be so generous, to a fault, to help her boy," end quote, Lori reported. But when Carol was 29 years old, on June 27th, 1987, she was found stabbed to death in Burnaby, British Columbia. Local media at the time reported that she was stabbed several times at another location and then dumped in a ditch close to the Wiggins Avenue near Marine Way and Burn Road. Friends recall seeing her last around 2 weeks prior, but the exact timeline was unknown as Carol was still living on the streets or in hotels around this time she went missing. As such, Carol's case also quickly went cold. Even without updates, Lori has fought for 3 decades to ensure her sister's name will never be invisible. She asked the First Nations Summit over 25 years ago to push for this type of inquiry. Lori also keeps in touch with the RCMP for any updates on the cold case reporting, and she says that they're the only ones that unfortunately have ever asked about Carol. Last for this week, we have a very short case, Carolyn Burns, who was born on June 2nd, 1920. Her surname was Prudhomme. On January 2nd, 1973, the then 52-year-old disappeared. Carolyn was last seen in the early morning leaving her home in Molinosa, Saskatchewan, a small, isolated community about 70 kilometers south of Laronge. Extensive searches of the area at the time found no trace of her, and to this date, that's all the information available on her case. Remember, to all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.